Season 3, Episode 3 of Matt's Madness is here. We've returned in a big way. We've got myself and we've got Ariel Puterman here. And we're going to talk about the early season tournaments in college basketball. Of course, this is really the best part of November in college basketball because you get to see these great teams in some warm weather and some tournament basketball. And then you don't see it again until the beginning of March and March Madness. First off, though, Ariel, glad to have you on for this show. I know we've researched a lot on these tournaments. There's probably as many good ones this year as ever.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of great teams. I think they did a really good job of constructing who's in some of these tournaments, and we'll kind of get into that later. But a lot of fun ones. Should be a really great feast week this year.
Yeah, Feast Week for college basketball fans means college basketball games and tournaments. For everyone else, they're picking out on the food. I mean, I guess I do a little bit of that too, but it's fun talking about this in August because you know that in about a month and a half's time, it seems a long ways away, but it really is creeping up closer and closer. Without further ado, though, we'll get into our first topic, and that's about whether or not these tournaments really matter. Obviously, the whole point of college basketball is to make it to the big dance. You want to get in that field of 68. Does winning an MTE, an early season tournament, matter? Do you think if you win a tournament, it kind of improves your stock?
It's actually interesting because when you brought up this idea when we were talking before this, my first reaction was no, it's early season. Um, Rotations haven't really been set, especially like chemistry with a lot of the transfer portal. Then I did a little research and I saw how have the champions done in their MTEs, and 8 of the last 9 have won theirs. The only one who didn't was Kansas when they lost on that crazy buzzer beater to Dayton 2 years ago. So, and if you look a little deeper, it's actually 13 of the last 16. So clearly, winning matters, and maybe it's just because the better team always wins. But these are some good teams winning some good tournaments. So I think if you do that, provides a boost to the team. It shows that they can beat these non-conference opponents, these top opponents that they're playing in these tournaments, and it gives them a little bit of a boost when it comes to tournament time and they're playing against these top teams and they're in that 3 games in 3 days format. So, like I mentioned, I thought, no, like it probably doesn't mean anything, but clearly it does.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I really don't think it matters much. I mean, I get where you're coming from. You win the MTE, you go on to win the NCAA tournament. It shows that you can win tournament basketball, which is what this is all about. For me, though, if you're looking at it from maybe the whole standpoint, just because you win an MTE doesn't automatically get you into the NCAA tournament. We all know that. But I guess taking it from an either further point than that, you could lose an MTE early on, not have a good rotation at that point. Take Virginia, for example. I looked at the Fort Myers tip off. It's a pretty good field. I don't think Virginia will come out of it in November, but I think if that tournament was played later on when Tony Bennett has more time to get his guys adjusted to each other and get more chemistry with each other, I think Virginia might have the best squad on paper. It just all depends on when you're playing these tournaments. They just so happen to be at the beginning of the season. So I say take them with a grain of salt. But if a team does go on to win, obviously, it does matter a bit more. I mean, going back from that, if a team goes 0-2, 0-3 in an MTE, but goes on to win 26 games, then should they be hurt in the seeding because they didn't play good in tournament basketball? I mean, I guess that's where I get kind of confused with this.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like I mentioned, I kind of agree with you. That's kind of my thought process going in. But when you think about it too, if you're winning in these tournaments, you're gonna want to win the whole thing. If you lose one of those games, you're in that consolation game. Obviously, you want to win because every game in college basketball matters with resumes and guarantee. There's no guarantee of making the tournament, but when you're in that tournament, you're winning your games. You're gonna try a little bit harder, and when you're in that format, which is the same format as March Madness, where you're on a neutral court, you're probably pretty far from your fans, so you'll have your fans turn up, but it's probably not going to be the majority. You're playing 3 games in 3 days, 4 days. It's great practice, and when it comes to that March time, your coach can pull you in and say, "We've done this before. Let's do it again." And I think that gives a big boost to those teams, and clearly it shows by the stats of the winners in the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's a good point. I will side with you there. You win an MTE, you win one of these early season tournaments, it helps you in the long run. Excuse me. I just feel like that's only a handful of teams. I mean, the bracket in March is made up of 68 teams. You're talking about maybe 12 of these early season tournaments, probably a few more, 15 or 16. That's a quarter of the field. Not all of them will get into the field. So all the other teams in the field, teams that will end up making the Final Four, likely did not win their early season tournament, but it's not like it's hurting them. I know we could go on and on about this for days, but that's just my 2 cents. Taking it, though, to the next more fun part, because these early season tournaments, no matter how you look at it come March, they do matter when they're being played. Every game matters the same. You got to win to improve your resume. We both came up with our top 5 fields this year. Fields change from year to year, so this answer could be different any year that we were to record this podcast. But I'll start with you. We'll go back. We'll go, through 5 through 1. What's your 5th best field this season?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you mentioned at the start of the show, there's a lot of really great tournaments this year. So picking just 5 was a little bit tricky, especially since some are 8 teams, some are 4 teams. But number 5, we went with the Baja Mar. So that's a 4-team tournament. We have Miami, Kansas State, Georgia, Providence. The thing I like about this is there's no like really great team like some of those other tournaments we'll talk about in a second, but there's a lot of really good teams.
A top 5 with no great team.
The thing is that some of these other ones have so many good teams that kind of doesn't move a lot for the rest. But I mean, Miami, we saw they made the Final Four last year. They bring back Nigel Pack. They got Matthew Cleveland. They bring back No Chad O'Meara. So that could be a top 10 team when it's all said. So I take back what I said there. Kansas State, another team. We saw how good they were last year. They brought in some really great transfers. Georgia, second year under Mike White. A lot of people think they're going to take a jump. Maybe not tournament jump, but they'll definitely be better. We just wrote about them in CBB Rank. Another thing we're doing for the website. And Providence, they did a great job this offseason, building a pretty good roster. They'll be a good competitor in the Big East. And honestly, they could be the team that wins this tournament. So 4 really solid teams. I'd say Georgia's probably the worst, but looks like any of those other 3 teams could win that, which could be really exciting.
Yeah, that's just tough for me to put them in my top 5, and I feel like it's really a lot of because of Georgia. I mean, you have Georgia in your field. It's not going to help the field any bit. But also just because, I mean, a lot of those teams, Ariel, let's be real, they hit their peak. I mean, Providence hit their peak. Ed Cooley's gone. I don't know if they're going to be the same with Kim English. I know we have to give him time. He hasn't even coached a game yet. But I don't know if it's the same Providence team. I think Miami had a great season last year. They obviously have returning pieces, but can they replicate that? And I think you could say the same thing about Kansas State. I mean, do you really think any of those teams will make the Sweet 16? If you had to place money on it, would you pick one of those to make the Sweet 16?
I mean, if we had this same discussion last year with the same teams, we'd be like, K-State, don't even talk about them. They're going to be pretty bad because that's what a lot of people thought about last year, and they made the Elite Eight. So same could be said for Providence. Same could be said for Georgia, who a lot of people think they're going to be good this year, but not really competing for a championship. And this could be a great indication that they could be that team. And that's what makes this interesting because there's a lot of question marks with both teams. And obviously Miami and K-State, they're both good teams. They don't look like championship threats right now, but this kind of tournament could be a sign that says, hey, maybe they are.
Hey, yeah, you never know, right? November, you look at some of these teams, and then in February, you're like, how did I not rank this team in my top 25? What was I missing there? My number 5 is the Charleston Classic, and I think it solely revolves around 2 of the 8 teams, and those 2 teams are St. John's and Houston. I think having Rick Pitino on St. John's in an early season tournament just automatically makes the tournament must watch. How is Rick Pitino going to take this Red Storm team from how Mike Anderson had it in the past? I think it's going to be good. I think St. John's is going to be a top half Big East team. People are going to be following the Johnnies all season long, and I think that when you're talking about November basketball, mind you, this is also the week before Thanksgiving, so it's kind of like the I don't know, like the breakfast to the appetizer to your Thanksgiving dinner. It'll be fun to watch them. It'll be fun to watch Houston. I mean, Kelvin Sampson has turned Houston into a perennial powerhouse over the past few years. So I think having those two in your field and likely meeting in the championship, St. John's Houston championship sounds pretty cool. They obviously don't play all that often at all. And then you got some other sleepers in there. I think Utah is a team who brought back a lot of great players. The Pac 12 as a whole is going to be really good this year, even though it's going to be like the last year of the Pac 12. There's a lot of really good teams on paper. LSU, second year head coach Matt McMahon, how can he do with his bunch? And then Dayton and Wake Forest, two teams that last year Wake Forest surprised some people. I think this year they have a good chance to be solid again. And Dayton always up there in the Atlantic 10. Of course, two teams bringing it down a bit, Towson and North Texas. I will say North Texas has been good lately. They just lost a lot to the transfer portal. But again, for me, St. John's and Houston really elevating this Charleston Classic.
Yeah, and I mean, very top heavy. It really comes down to quality versus quantity. And I mean, Houston, St. John's. If St. John's is what they're looking like they can be with Rick Pitino, then they could be a huge winner out of this. But then you kind of like you mentioned, like North Texas, Towson, that's two of the 6 teams that just aren't even on the same level. And then you got 2 other teams in Wake Forest and LSU, probably not even top 100 in the country. So then you kind of leave like 2 okay teams and then 2 really good teams. So will we have an exciting game before the semifinal? Probably not. Maybe even the semifinal won't be too exciting because there's 2 teams that are just that much better than everyone else in the field. So sure, you'll have an exciting final, but it's not which is going to be the best game. It's which is the best tournament. So that's what I'm kind of struggling with ranking.
Fair. I mean, when you're looking at number 5, we only got so many options here. It's going to get better. I promise that.
Yep, great point there.
Wait, what's your number 4?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Empire Classic. Another 4-team tournament. We have UConn national champions. We have Indiana, Texas, and Louisville. Obviously, there's the main outlier, Louisville. If they don't lose any of these games by 20, then great for them. But, I mean, UConn, they lost a couple guys, but they'll still be top 5 team heading into the season. You got Indiana. They lost Trace Jackson-Davis, obviously, but I think Khalil Ware is going to be really solid and surprise a lot of people, and they'll overperform what they're projected to do. And Texas is always solid. They brought in A. Smith. They got good returners in Dessou and Dylan Mitchell, and they're always one of those top teams. So I think besides Louisville, you have 3 really good teams, and it could make a really exciting tournament, even if it's only 4 teams.
Yeah, I think you're sleeping a bit. I'll be honest. I think the Empire Classic is a little bit better than 4, but I'll get to that in a bit. So I'll save the argument for my case. But at number 4, I have the Fort Myers tip-off. I just wrote an article on this on cbbreview.com. You can check out the field. And I'll tell you about the field because I'll be honest, it's a really good field on paper. I think everyone would agree with that. And I think it's even undervalued. I mean, this might end up as a top 3 tournament after the season, but, just depends how some of these teams pan out. Start with Wisconsin. Probably the best team on paper in this tournament. They won over 20 games last season. They bring back Tyler Wall, Stephen Crowell, Chucky Hepburn, a ton of guys return for the Badgers. Again, on a team that was kind of young, played pretty good last year. The Big Ten's always difficult. Wisconsin was right there. Big Ten lost a lot of great teams this year. So if we're looking at the Big Ten as a whole, great players on some of these great teams. But Wisconsin really didn't. They brought back a lot of the same core. And I'll say this real quick. Last year I was high on Penn State for the same reason. Penn State proved me right. So I guess I'll say the same with Wisconsin this year. You bring back a core like they did, and you will be good because that matters. I know the transfer portal is fun and all, but bringing back guys that already know how to play together and win together is key. So I think right now you have a team that has the potential to make a real long run in March. They'll be playing Virginia. So you've got a great semifinal matchup right away in this 4-team event because Virginia is always good. I'll be honest, Virginia's not as good as in the past, but Jordan Minor, Andrew Rohde, a couple guys that played at mid-major programs were really good. And if they can live up to their expectations, I think Virginia will. be a top 5 team in the ACC. On the other side of the bracket, you've got West Virginia. I mean, where do I even start with these storylines? I mean, we already know what's going on with the saga with Bob Huggins, a new head coach in Morgantown, and the transfer portal that they just absolutely ran through. I mean, West Virginia is just making the transfer portal their. I mean, that's like their thing at this point. like
Yeah.
like no other team.
It's an off season like we saw with West Virginia this year. It's
Yeah,
insane.
you can't make it up what they did. And then SMU, another team who, on a lighter note, also went real heavy in the transfer portal, got a lot of great players. So all this to say that you've got a really two potential top 25 teams in Wisconsin and West Virginia when this event happens. You've got a Virginia team that could be top 25 when the season ends. And you've got an SMU team who is kind of that underrated wild card, a team that only won 10 games last season, but I think could push toward 20 this year. They have that much talent coming in.
Yeah. I mean, those 4-team tournaments are so hard to rank just because there's so few teams and there's a lot of really great ones. So I wish I ranked them, but we can only pick 5, so they just missed the list. But
Yeah, and I'll spare you for that because I'll admit, like it's a lot of undervalued teams there. So you just got to be a good basketball mind to understand the value in that.
Yeah, and that's why Feast Week's so fun. All these great tournaments. We mentioned Charleston's a little bit earlier, so it's not all jumbled into one, but you have those 2 really great weeks of just getting to watch all these fun teams and seeing a lot of great games. So with my number 3, yep, I'm going to go with the ESPN events. And it's not the most stacked field. We have Penn State, A&M, Texas A&M, FAU, Butler, Iowa State, VCU, Boise State, and Virginia Tech. When you look at it, FAU and Texas A&M are the clear 2 best teams, but everyone else is perfectly even with each other. And when I'm watching a tournament, yes, obviously I want to see the best team win, but I want to see a lot of great games. And I think these will be great games. Will any of these teams besides Texas A&M and FAU make the tournament in March? Maybe. We'll see. Maybe Iowa State. But I think this will lead to a lot of really close games, a lot of games that are in single digits with 2 minutes left, a lot of hopefully close games. And that's what makes the tournament fun. It's not always seeing the best team. It's about watching close games. And I think the way these teams play and the way they've constructed their rosters, I think there will be a lot of really fun and exciting games from that. And that's what all these tournaments are about. So maybe not a popular pick for a top 5 is that ESPN events when looking on paper, but I think there will be a lot of fun games in there.
You know, I'll give it to you. And Max Rice at Boise State, who knows? Maybe he could lead the Broncos to another tournament. I'll give that one to you. I mean, I'll be honest though. You're picking you're going into these events that you're ranking and you're previewing it with saying, "Oh, this isn't a great team. This isn't a stacked field." So you're losing me a bit there. If this was around the horn, I might be able to deduct some points from you right now.
I think it isn't. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. I talked about it before that I thought you rated the Empire Classic a bit low. I have it at number 3. Again, like you said, I'll agree with you. It's a 4-team event, so it's tough to really rank them. I look at this for one reason here is that you got the national champs in this. You get the defending national champs in a tournament. It makes it that much better. This is UConn country in New York City, and that leads me to my second point. It's New York. Look at the programs you've got in this field. You've got the Huskies, you've got the Indiana Hoosiers, the Texas Longhorns, and the Louisville Cardinals. There are fans of every program imaginable in New York City, but I would say that these 4 are probably within the top 20, maybe even 15 of college basketball fans in New York. I mean, these are storied programs. 2 of them played in the Big East, so they will travel to New York, Indiana, you know that they'll travel, and Texas as well. So I think overall, if you're going to the Empire Classic and not a fan of these teams, you'll still have a great time because all these fans will get into it. When you do look at the teams, UConn might not be the same team as last year, but they're still going to be a top 15 team, especially top 10 to begin the season. Indiana will have some struggles. I'm not a big fan of Indiana, but I do think that Texas does have it again this year. And I think that Louisville will turn it around. I would hope so. They only won 4 games last year. That's pretty tough to do worse than. So, like you mentioned, maybe you don't have four stack teams, but you have four historic programs, and you've definitely got some great matchups here. If you get a UConn Texas, final, then that would be must watch basketball during Feast Week.
Yeah, Louisville's just so bad. Like I honestly don't think they got better in the offseason. That's what worries me. And
Yeah,
they were really bad last year. So against these really good teams, I just don't see how they can make any of these games competitive. And when you only have 4 games in the whole tournament and 2 of them are kind of duds, then kind of makes it not. I mean, I had them in my top 5, so I'm just playing a little devil's advocate. But yeah, it's just that Louisville selection that really bugs me because it could have been such a great tournament. They picked a good team to replace them.
yeah. If you had like, I'm trying to think any other team out of the ACC. Like, imagine if like Miami was in that tournament instead. I know Miami was already in the Baja Mar, and that's a great tournament. But yeah, I know what you're saying there.
Even
Um,
like a lower level team like Pitt,
yeah,
who overperformed last year, if you put them in there, they're probably on the same level as Indiana this year, and I think that could make a good matchup.
yeah.
They're both teams win or both teams lose, but just putting Louisville in there just really tanks the stock for this tournament, which is so frustrating because it's a great tournament overall and a lot of great history with that tournament as well, which we'll get into later.
Into the top two.
Yeah, top 2. Um, I'm gonna assume we have the same top 2, whether it's in the same order or not. I think there's a clear top 2 this year, and kind of every year, honestly. But my number 2 is Battle for Atlantis. We have some great teams this year: Arkansas, Memphis, Michigan, UNC, Northern Iowa, Stanford, Texas Tech, and of course Villanova. I mean, a lot of great programs in there, a lot of fun teams as well. You might think off the bat Northern Iowa is the clear outlier, but a lot of people are saying they could be this year's FAU. They have a really talented roster, and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by how good they are. Then you got Stanford, such an interesting team with their whole head coach situation, but a decent team on paper. Arkansas, Musselman. Every year he's going to bring it. Memphis, they've got a really solid team. They did a good job in the portal. Waiting on a few waivers, but if they can get those, then they could be a top 25 team. Michigan, a lot of people think they're going to be down, but Juwan Howard usually finds a way to succeed. UNC, same thing. And then you got Texas Tech. Grant McCaslin's the new coach. A lot of people think he's going to overperform like he did with North Texas. And then Villanova's that last team. Obviously not an ideal year last year, but they were dealing with some injuries. A lot of people think they're going to take a huge jump this year. So just a lot of really great teams. That 8-team format is a lot of fun too because you get to see a lot of cool matchups, and the tournament goes a little bit longer than the 4-game. So I think there will be some great games in this, a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to see this tournament.
Yeah, and you summed it up great. The Battle for Atlantis is my number 2, so I'll take it from a different perspective here. I'm actually going to complain about the way they organized this bracket. I mean, you've got it was a former championship game between North Carolina and Villanova, arguably the two best teams in this tournament. Texas Tech and Michigan, I think, are going to have down years. Memphis, it's all about potential, and can Penny Hardaway bring them over the top? Arkansas is right there. So I get you could say that North Carolina and Arkansas are the best two teams in this bracket, but I would argue that Villanova is maybe even better than Arkansas. I think that Kyle Neptune brought in a terrific transfer portal class, and I think he's going to turn this around this season. We saw a lot of problems last year. Injuries from day one. Was Cam Whitmore not giving it his all? Who knows what was going on in those Wildcats practices? But all I do know is that Villanova is not going to have 2 years like that in a row. I wish that Villanova and North Carolina could have been the potential championship game. You never know how these brackets are going to end up in the long run, but I want to hear your thoughts on that because I think that they kind of set this bracket up wrong.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that, and yeah, I think something I kind of want to steer away the conversation, but I want to talk about as well is a lot of great coaching headlines in this bracket. We have some hot seat. We have obviously Stanford, like I mentioned, UNC. A lot of people are talking about whether Hubert Davis, if he can't turn around this year, is he the guy? Michigan with Juwan Howard. I mean, they've been underperforming the last couple of years. And then you got some new coaches. You got McCaslin. How's he going to perform? Back to the hot seat, Penny Hardaway. No one really knows what he's about. They were kind of disappointed with that first round exit last year. Musselman's great coach, but he's been in the news a few times just with his actions. So a lot of really great head coaching storylines there. Northern Iowa, I'm not going to really talk about because it seems like they're pretty set over there. But yeah, I mean, this will be a good sign of which direction. Obviously, we mentioned at the start of the show that these tournaments don't really determine your season, but the quick reactions will be if one team underperforms like UNC or Michigan, how's that going to affect their season and how's that going to affect their coach? Another way around, if Texas Tech comes out winning this tournament, is Grant McCassin the best coach in the Big 12? We'll have those conversations. So that's and same with Nova. If they win, is Cal Neptune back? Things like that.
If Texas Tech goes 2-1 in this tournament, I think we might be able to have those discussions because Texas Tech on paper looks like they could be in for a Louisville type of year. I'll be honest. Not really hyped about what they got.
Yeah. We'll talk about the Big 12 closer to the season because
Oh yeah,
obviously very passionate about that. But we'll see how they do in this tournament. Should be a lot of fun.
well, why don't you lead us into our number one because we do agree on this, and it is without a doubt the top tournament in Feast Week.
Yep, and that will of course be the Maui Invitational. I mean, wow, this could be the best tournament of all time. Just looking on paper right now,
Yeah.
obviously teams could underperform this season, and we can look back in March and say this all wasn't all that we thought it was. But looking at it right now, I mean, Tennessee, really talented roster. They won it last year, I think. And then you got Syracuse, who new coach. Obviously, Matt, you can talk about this a little bit more, but Judah Mintz is back. A lot of people think he could be one of the best guards in college basketball this year, and they brought in some really talented guys as well. Purdue, Zach Edey is back, player of the year. They'll be really good. Those freshman guards, they'll have a year of experience. They'll get better. Gonzaga, I mean, the most consistent team the last 15 years, I'd say. And they brought in Ryan Nembhard, one of my favorite college basketball players. They lose Timmy, but with Mark Few, they're going to be great. And then you got Kansas, arguably the preseason number one. They brought in Hunter Dickinson. Bill Self's healthy again. Like they're probably the favorites heading in. And then the best team on paper, Chaminade, of course, who always find their way into this tournament. Then you got UCLA. Nick Cronin's a great coach. They lost a lot last year, but they always find ways to win. And then, of course, Marquette, who could be the best team in the Big East. I know the Big East is really top heavy, but Shaka Smart's back. They bring back most of their team from last year. That was Big East champions, and they'll probably be a top 5, top 10 team heading into this college basketball season. So you have arguably 4 of the top 10 teams in this tournament, maybe even more. And then you got some teams that could be top 25 easily by the end of the season. I mean, it's ridiculous how stacked this is, and that should just lead to a lot of really great games.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. Like you summed it up right there. I was gonna say that. I'm glad we agreed that on paper this might be the most stacked early season tournament in college basketball history. The Maui Invitational is that good this year. You have Chaminade, and it doesn't even matter. By the way, they play in the Pac West, which in about a year is going to be better than the Pac-12. So props to them. Sometimes it's like, okay, I wish there was an 8th team, but it doesn't even matter this year. The format is pretty much always the same. You get the Power 6 plus a mid-major team. Well, guess what? You go and get the best mid-major team who isn't even really a mid-major, and that's Gonzaga. And I think year to year, usually the Maui, 3 of those 6 power conference teams are maybe the number 1 or the number 2 team in the conference. With the exception of Syracuse and UCLA, Tennessee, Marquette, Purdue, and Kansas are all either number 1 or number 2 in their conference heading into the season. Of course, Kansas and Purdue are maybe number 1 and 2 in the country, whichever way you organize them. Then, like you mentioned before, I mean, UCLA is going to be in for a down year, but Mick Cronin always coaches well, and they're one of the most storied programs in history, so it doesn't even matter that they're going to be in for a little bit of a down year. It's still great that UCLA is in it, and you can say the same about Syracuse to a lighter extent. A great storied program, maybe the most underrated player in this entire tournament in Judah Mintz, because I think he's going to be in for a breakout year. You talk about teams that might win the Maui, who knows? Maybe Judah Mintz goes out and averages 22-6 and get Syracuse to the championship game of this tournament. Like, you never know what can happen in the Maui. By the way, don't quote me on this, but I think Cuse is undefeated in the Maui Invitational. They've won it a few times. So I should know that, but I'm just throwing that out there. I'm just
Yeah,
throwing that out there. I'm
great
gonna
point.
ride off that fact.
I mean, just looking at the quarterfinals, it's insane. So this is
Uh,
the first round. You have Tennessee, Syracuse. You have Purdue, Gonzaga. I mean, that could be a Final Four matchup in a few months from now. Kansas,
yeah,
Chaminade, and then you have UCLA, Marquette. So I mean, that's just insane right off the bat. That's just the quarterfinals too. Then you get semifinals, which could be even better than the finals, which is it could be a championship preview. Honestly, we could be talking about that after that game. That these are the two best teams in the country, which is so exciting. And obviously, a lot going on in Maui right now. We're praying that everything's okay and that we can have this tournament. Obviously, that's way, way, way down on priorities right now. And if it happens, it happens. If not, if not. But if it does happen, then I think college basketball fans and just basketball fans in general are in for a treat.
yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that is important. Obviously, right now, that's at the focal point when you're talking about Maui is what's going on with the wildfires and how many people have lost their lives. And our prayers go over to them here at CBB Review. I believe that when COVID went on, they did move the tournament to North Carolina. So I would assume the tournament will still get played. Just where it gets played is the question. I do want to just kind of go on what you said there, and this is the coolest part. I'll take it to another level. Not only could we see a championship preview here, we could see multiple championship previews. It's not like Kansas versus Purdue is the only possible championship outcome. I mean, you could get Kansas Tennessee, you could get Kansas Gonzaga, you could get Purdue Kansas, Purdue Marquette. There's multiple potential championship games that could end up in a Final Four or championship in the big dance. And that's what makes this year's Maui so exciting. We're going to take that into our final discussion point today. That's the Mount Rushmore of these early season tournaments. I mentioned before, fields change from year to year, but some of these tournaments have been around longer than others. They have more of a history than others. So why don't you just give me your Mount Rushmore? We won't go one by one
Yeah,
and talk a little bit about that.
yeah. So number one, obviously all the heads are the same size, but if there was a bigger head, it would be the Maui. I mean, every year it delivers. We saw last year that crazy game with Creighton and Arkansas, and then that Arizona Creighton game, the final. We saw that Dayton Kansas game a few years ago. That looked like it was going to be a championship preview before obviously COVID took it away. But that's always such a great one, especially when Bill Walton's on the call. He loves Maui more than anyone else in this tournament, more than anyone else. And then our number two for this year, but also my number two on the Mount Rushmore was Battle for Atlantis, another great 8-team tournament that always delivers. Number three is the Empire Classic. A lot of great teams always playing that tournament. And then my last head on my Mount Rushmore college basketball early season tournaments is the Charleston Classic. Not necessarily because it's the best teams, but it's usually the first 8-team tournament. So that kind of feels like the kickoff of Feast Week. That always gets me excited for all the early MTEs. So that's my Mount Rushmore. Matt, what's yours?
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you on a few of them, but I feel like maybe you missed the ball on some of them in 2023. Um, I think your history is decent, but we'll go with the Maui. The Maui is, like you mentioned, when you look at Feast Week, you want to see what tournaments have the best fields. But there's one tournament that's different. For the Maui, you just look to see who's playing in the Maui. You know the field's going to be great. You know the history of the Maui, how fun it is. That stands alone. If you had to enlarge one of the heads on Mount Rushmore, it'd be the Maui. But the Battle for Atlantis, I think, is right behind it. The Battle for Atlantis is another great tournament. We both had it at number two. I know it's a little bit newer.
I mean,
What's that?
Battle for Atlantis is just such a cool name too.
Oh yeah,
The tournament. I think they nailed it when they made that. Whoever was in charge of that.
yeah. The marketing for that is amazing, and again, like it's kind of become a staple 8-team tournament. Like you know the Maui is going to be good, but you also know that the Battle for Atlantis is going to be good as well. I like how you went the Empire Classic with yours. I thought that was a good pick. Um, you did have that, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
did. That
yeah.
was my number three.
I get confused because I know that the Umpire Classic used to be the Coaches versus Cancer Challenge back in the day. And I think when it was at that, it was at its peak. But I feel like it's almost lost a little bit of ground. I wish that it was still named that. So I'm going to replace it with mine with the Continental Tire main event. I think the field is good this year, but at this point, you've got multiple tournaments in New York City. Why not bring it out to Vegas? It's the booming sports capital of the world. It's always fun. You get late night basketball. I work late for my day job, so I can watch the Continental Tire main event and I can have fun watching it. And if I'm not mistaken, I know I left it off this year, but St. Mary's, San Diego State, Washington, and Xavier is a pretty strong field. So I know that doesn't matter as much for the Mount Rushmore, but I do want to shout it out because you could get a potential St. Mary's, Xavier, San Diego State, Xavier. Washington's going to be really good this year. They're good. They're a very underrated team. So I know that's a side note, but that's always a great tournament year round. And then the NIT tip off. I mean, that tournament used to be it when we were growing up. Was it not? If I'm not mistaken, it used to be a 16 team tournament.
Yeah, there's a couple on there that probably were a lot bigger back then that weren't now, like the PK 80, PK 85s, like all those. I wanted to add those, but they're not happening this year. So, but yeah, I think you're right on that 16 team tournament.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I wish I could. In fact, I am looking it up right now just to try to. Yeah, it wasn't even that long ago. In 2013, it was a 16 team tournament. You had Arizona beating Duke in the championship. So again, we're talking Mount Rushmore. I just think the history of this tournament, if they could ever bring it back up to that, even like I know the PK 80, the Phil Knight was only like a one-time thing, two-time thing, whatever. Like it'd be cool to see the NIT season tip off be like a 16 team tournament once every 5 years. Just bring back the nostalgia for us that remember it. But yeah, those are my Mount Rushmores. I understand your Charleston Classic there, but I'll be honest. I think you dropped the ball. I mean, like, do the people really want that, or do
I
they
think
want
it's
the
I
tip
think
off?
the college basketball diehards who, they get excited for this time of the year, and that's kind of the kickoff for a lot of people is that Charleston Classic, so they know that it's tournament time. It's time for Feast Week. I have a little trivia for you. I want to test your knowledge and kind of look back a year from now. So Empire State Class or Empire Classic last year. Do you know who won and who was the tournament MVP? I'll give you a hint. It was one of your favorite teams was in that tournament and lost in the final.
In the Empire Classic last year?
Yeah, 2022.
I know that Syracuse played Richmond,
Correct.
and I know that St. John's played someone else, and I don't know who St. John's played, and I bet that's the team that won. Uh,
So St. John's won.
St.
Who
John's.
was their Who was their MVP?
I mean, I'll go with Posh Alexander.
Nope.
Dylan Adaiwusu?
Nope.
Who was it?
Andre Curbelo.
Interesting. Oh, he did have a big game. I remember this now.
Yeah.
He had a
So
couple big games. Wow.
if you want to argue that these MTEs and winning those don't matter, that's your perfect case study because we know what happened with Curbelo on St. John's. I think after that game, he probably started one more game the rest of the season, and he was the MVP of this tournament. So it's just funny looking back, seeing like, wow, he was the best player on the team. Imagine what St. John's fans are thinking, like, we just got the steal of the transfer portal. We just won this tournament. Like, this is our year. And then, I mean, this year they're looking a lot better, but just funny to look a year back and see what happened.
So, as the forecaster that I am, Kansas will win the Maui Invitational, and Hunter Dickinson will win the MVP and not play a single game after Bill Self benches him for the rest of the season. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree with that, but well, may the best team win the Maui.
May the best team win. Both of our teams are in. I will say I've confirmed my facts. Syracuse has played in the Maui 3 times. They've won it each of the 3 times they've played. 9-0 in Maui Invitational history. Does that scare you at all?
All I'll say is if you're listening to this and you are in a legal betting state, then Matt's got some insider tips for you. As a Kansas fan and a knowledgeable person, I will not recommend that bet, especially since there's so many other good teams in that. But hey, you never know. Syracuse, it's not like they're bad and like them winning would be huge and like a massive upset. But when you just look at all the other teams, they're probably closer to the bottom than the top.
And they are, and that's what makes me at least excited for maybe a possible Maui win. But we shall see. We've still got a ways to go. We're going to continue to preview college basketball throughout the offseason here on Matt's Madness, here on CBB Review Studio. And we're going to try to get some cool guests lined up on CBB Review Courtside as we get closer to the season, as college basketball has kind of moved from, okay, we're in the offseason, no one really cares anymore, to we're in the off season, but it is coming fast, and we're almost at the start of the season. And I cannot wait for November 6th. And we're within 80 days until college basketball. I can't believe it. CBB rank is churning along.
Yeah, make sure to go on the website. We're putting out articles every day ranking the top 100 teams going to next season, like Matt mentioned. We got the top 20, or sorry, I guess 100 through 80 done. And we'll keep putting those out every day. So you want to see where your team ranks. If you think they're a top 100 team, then make sure to tune in every day. And if not, just read about these teams because it's interesting, especially with all the transfer portal moves. These teams move around a lot. So you might see some names that you recognize on teams you don't recognize. So that's always fun as well.
It is 100% CBB rank coming at you every day. Colgate was Saturday's team, by the way, as we're recording this, number 79, and you'll have to wait and see what the next teams are as we move on in the offseason. But again, for Ariel Puterman, I'm Matt Mlodzinski. This has been another episode of Matt's Madness.